just wanted to start us off really with asking around the table what the mood of the market is at the moment. It's been I think we're a year ago now, aren't we, since a very short-lived government, and probably upset a lot of things across the various parts of the economy. So what's the situation been like in the markets you work in? What are you hearing from your customers, and sort of what's that general sentiment?
I think it's been quite mixed for us. So some developments have sold very quickly, bungalows especially. We've got a small development in North East Derbyshire, sold very quickly. We've got a development at Waverley in Rotherham on the motorway network that sold out very quickly. Another development a little bit slower, so the customers sort of mixed. Depends on the type of property, the price band. I think from our perspective, we've been fortunate. We've met different funds that are buying properties in bulk. The PRS single family homes market is quite buoyant. So we've been fortunate in that regard. I do agree with you. Buyers are cautious, nervous, but I think the interest rate hike will feed through into rents that will go up, and ultimately people need somewhere to live. So our sort of motto is keep doing what we're doing, keep building a good product. People either buy them to live in or people will buy them to rent. So it is mixed. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be slow, but it will correct itself in due course. Yeah, we've got to build something like 300,000 homes a year. In the best years we build 250,000. I think this year we'll build 180,000. Planning applications have collapsed to an all-time low. So I think we've got supply and demand issues that will happen anyway that will help correct the market.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that we've seen based around this market, market environment as the last year is the supply and demand that people were talking about. Our demand for housing has gone through the roof. Our housing list is longer than ever. We are more right to buy properties are leaving our stock than ever. We had obviously the delays of repairs and voids and stuff over the pandemic, and the delays in getting on site. So in terms of what we're doing with working with developers to provide housing in the city, we've got some really good partnerships that are going on where we've managed to find developers who want to work with us to do affordable schemes. We've got one in the city centre that's going to be 100% affordable.
So we generally have stuff which is either in conservation area, it's not grade 2 listed, the 5-storey buildings, and we're often pushed back on being able to put things like solar barrel on. You can't dig big trenches to put in and do heat source pumps. You can't do any of these things, or we can't replace the windows because we're pushed back to replace the windows. So it then becomes a real challenge, because then we start to look at the EPC ratings. So we're selling these things on. We can't get higher than a D rating unless we do something which is 20 centimetres deep in insulation, and therefore you then become restricted on the size of the rooms. It's a real catch-22, because it just feels the whole process has been developed towards new build. And actually we've got a significant amount of stock on the market, and we've got an even bigger problem. So you look at the numbers it's going to cost for people. So in the south, they're saying it's going to cost £75,000 for people to become EPC compliant. And what are you going to do? Chuck them in prison? We're going to throw in a lot of people in prison, because, and then even in the north, you've got roughly £35,000 to convert a house. People are not going to be able to do that, not going to be able to afford it.
People are having with getting standards built into planning and getting, and just unlocking the planning system. I think every area's had a planning backlog that came out of COVID, that came out of not being able to do site visits, that came out of the original massive sort of surge in people doing home improvements and stuff during COVID, clogged up the planning system. It took a lot of time to unclog. But I think in Leeds, we use the planning system as much as we can to build those standards in. We have the local plan, which pushes us towards net zero.
And out of interest, in terms of how that's planned, is there an issue there with sort of skilled labour and the product? When you move into looking at sort of air source heat pumps, when we're looking at future home standards, I've read a lot in the press. We just don't have the skilled labour for it. We don't have the product. It's not coming forward quick enough. So it's okay to have these aspirations in terms of delivering these units, but if we don't have that, there's again you're hitting a sort of ceiling.
We have all the ability to produce zero carbon buildings, whether it's refurb or new builds. It's much easier in new build, of course. We do lack technical skills, people really understanding what is the important thing, particularly with existing buildings, someone coming in and being able to understand what the main levers are to get that down. That's a skill that's in really short supply. I think on the new build side, we can do it. We should be doing it. We should be pushing to do that much faster and immediately. The carbon emissions with embodied carbon are immediate. They're not the consequential carbon cost over 50 years or 100 years of lifespan. They're the materials you're consuming immediately. And so the materials we build our homes with have this biggest immediate impact on carbon. And then the third area, and when we've modelled this on a 50-year lifespan of a 50-year period of a house, these three areas have similar amounts of carbon emissions. The third area is the consequential carbon cost. So where you build a place and the transport infrastructure you lock into that has a similar amount of carbon as the operational carbon. So if you're building single occupancy housing estates, the carbon cost of people commuting to and from those estates is about the same as getting a home to be net zero.
I think we need to encourage brownfield. I think there needs to be more grants. So we've benefited from the South Yorkshire Combined Authority Mayoral grants for the brownfield, which is fantastic. So I think tax on VAT on refurb. So at present you pay VAT on refurbishments of existing housing stock or refurbs for conversions. It's VAT exempt on new build, but I'd like to see faster planning systems for brownfield, grants for brownfield, new homes bonus reintroduced. I'd like to see much more support from Homes England because they help the SMEs better than some of the banking sector. So when we're trying to do placemaking projects, traditional banks sometimes don't value the commercial space that you build. So how do we fund in SMEs better, encourage more SMEs into the market, and I think declare a national emergency on it.
Priority for us is making sure whatever's built is sellable. So we're going to make sure that they're hitting the right standards. We're sort of driven to some degree by the industry. The government are telling developers that you must deliver to a certain standard. We follow that trend, and our expectation is that our developers will meet the requirements of their local authority and the planning system. There's no particular benefit from funding from a cost perspective, but I think where the challenge, looking at more on the MMC side, is if you move from, so at the moment we're doing some MMC, because MMC is quite wide ranging, anything from doing SIP panels up to volumetric. When you as you push more towards volumetric, it becomes a lot harder to fund. We're seeing a lot of our developers pivot away from the full volumetric idea, more to sort of piecemeal, sort of pods, maybe just materials, and it can be more cash flow, so it's still considered MMC.
We need to have a pipeline, we need to be in flow, we need to be able to move as smoothly as we can the projects through our process, which all works fine. It all works fine in theory. However, you lay on all of the external macroeconomic factors and things that mess that up, and it still requires you to be agile enough to keep things moving. We have to own that risk. We have to innovate. We have to invest long term. We have to set a supply chain with us. We have to upskill people. We have to train them. We have to bring people in.
You may want to come across this, but I was out on the site last week with a client who has now signed up an agreement with one of the energy suppliers where they will give 5 years free electric supply. So I think the principle, and you'll probably know more detail than I do, is that the scheme will be built with more PV panels, the batteries will go in, but essentially the supplier will control the PV panels, they will control the batteries, and therefore they will then play the market in terms of the cost of the energy, which I thought was quite interesting.
Zero bills with Octopus, I think.
Yeah. There you go. But I thought it was quite interesting, and from what the client was telling me, the idea is that they would hope that they can push that to 10 years free energy, but it will be down to Octopus to play the energy market.
I think that's a whole other problem, is how do you decarbonise the energy market and balance supply and demand, and that's all they're doing. It's arbitrage on supply and demand, carbon costs, and they think at a macro scale that they could get the whole, all new build housing to be on that sort of model, which is really encouraging. And you need people like that have that high level industry vision to say we're going to completely change the way this industry works. And I think we need a similar thing in housing. I think across those two different system change of what we're building and how we're building it. I think a lot of the innovation comes down to we're looking at sort of smart technology. I think it's less relevant really about energy efficient homes. Is about how do you build homes that are airtight, that have no thermal bridges and are well insulated. We've got all that technology. We've got all the skills. It's about the supply chain jiving down, the embodied carbon cost of all that.
Yeah, tons of tech, loads of good stuff coming out all the time. But again, the rules and regulations aren't quite keeping up to speed. So, for example, if you're doing a full electric house, the SAP calculation doesn't take into account electric heating systems yet. So if you want to use electric radiators or infrared radiators, which are great, you can mount them on the ceiling, you can have them as mirrors, they're not really recognised yet. So the tech is great. We know everything is there for us to use. It's just making sure the regulatory framework is aligned with what we need to do as well.